Okay, can I welcome you all to the 2018 ISTE Retreat? I'm Robin Williams, and I'm pleased to share with you that this is our 14th retreat. And the first retreat we had up in the Highlands in the Burn, and it had goals to explore cross-cutting linkages between various projects, pursue new conceptual theoretical advances, and strengthen research, development, culture, and outcomes. And I think that is the kind of recipe we had, and it seems to have worked quite well. And at each ISTE retreat, I say, why do we do this? ISTE, you will recall, is the research network of networks that tries to bring together people across the University of Edinburgh and beyond interested in science, technology, and innovation studies. So this is where we meet. We have a chance to recharge our batteries, a safe space, a playful space, where we can explore new ideas and discuss them with each other. And also, we're all very busy. We all have our own special areas of research. We all have our own theoretical and analytical traditions. And there's a tendency in any academic community to kind of coagulate, to focus down on your own specific concerns and interests. And this is an attempt to overcome any tendency towards introversion. We try to bring in new colleagues, and we're very pleased to see some of our new staff here and making an important role to the discussions today. And it's a place where hopefully kind of hot ideas, exciting ideas will be first raised and then will take off. And I remember a couple of years ago, Donald came and gave us a talk about performativity, and it was a little bit like an epidemic, you know. Measles went through the childhood communities around Edinburgh schools, and performativity went through our writing like a rash, and it was very helpful and creative. So that's the kind of thing we want to do. The last ISTE retreat flagged some things that we thought were priorities going forward. One priority was revisiting the relationship between science and technology studies and the field of innovation studies, which had tended to drift apart and which were being proclaimed as separate fields. And there was much discussion about whether STS needed to institutionalize itself as a field of its own, and if so, how that might be done. And that was a kind of introverted discussion, but we were also looking outwards, and we were excited to see the multiplicity of relationships that science and technology and innovation studies had established, for example, with colleagues from design studies, colleagues from the business school in particular, in organization studies, informatics, and the like. And we were discussing how to sustain engagements on many fronts. And also how to bring in absent colleagues who we not managed to get along. So this year we have a theme for our workshop, and the theme is engaging with power. And this has two dimensions. One is, how do we in our theories and our fieldwork actually engage with issues of unequal access to power and resources? How do we address the way that social structure may pattern and condition outcomes? And here, clearly, the success for science and technology studies in particular has been in micro-sociological accounts of interaction between actors involved in building technologies, building organizations, building institutions. So there's been extraordinary success in bottom-up explanation, but do we need to find ways of taking on board broader context? And part of the inspiration for that was an interesting talk that a paper that Donald had circulated, which is going to be the subject of his talk, so I'm not going to anticipate that. So one of our goals is to address these things theoretically. The other issue is how we engage with power in our interventions. And let me just jump forward a second. You know, we find that that in our own work, we're getting increasingly close relationships with scientists, engineers, with policymakers in key areas of science, technology, and innovation. And in Edinburgh's work, for example, we've got stuff on synthetic biology that Jane's doing, the work on digital health that lots of people are doing, digital data science that lots of people are doing. In my own area, we're now working very closely with key players in the National Health Service, trying to introduce new computer technologies. We hope that Luke Bisbee will join us tomorrow, who's on the Grenfell inquiry into the fire disaster there. So across a range of areas, we now find ourselves in key arenas, in discussion with key decision makers. And my sense is that this opens up a set of problems. It opens up questions about our accountability to various stakeholders and concerns. And there isn't yet an STS language. There isn't yet an STS practice. And that's interesting, because it seems to me that actually that STS from the outset inherited an activist tradition. Now, has everybody got a copy of the ISTE newsletter? If not, I encourage you to get it and have a look at it. In it, you'll find two interviews that were made, two personal statements that were collected at the time of the Science Studies Unit 50th anniversary celebrations. And two colleagues who couldn't join us at that celebration gave us personal reflections on their time. The first of these is Gary Werski, who was the first researcher employed by the Science Studies Unit. And he was one of the new left who came to challenge the previous group who'd talked about the social role of science technology, the Bernalite tradition, and in some senses constituted at least one strand within STS, the strand that was then closely associated with the radical science movement, and with a very strong Marxist commitment to certain kinds of analysis. And then the second piece of work you'll see is by Steve Shapin. You probably don't know Gary Werski, but you'll certainly know Steve Shapin, because his was one of the foundational studies which, along with Barry and David Bloor, constituted the field of sociology and scientific knowledge. Outstanding academic, scholarly work that really was helpful. Now, what's interesting about Steve's reflection is that he also noticed that in the Science Studies Unit, under the tutelage of its founder, David Edge, were a whole load of people doing interdisciplinary research in, for example, issues of water management, third world development, environment. And Steve calls these the useful people. And Steve mentions how, in his encouragement of junior colleagues in Science Studies Unit, he said to colleagues, what you need to do is scholarly work. Don't get involved in political action. And there was a cultural gap between the useful people and the scholarly tradition. So the two traditions were pushed apart. And what's interesting is that Steve ends his reflection by saying he wished he'd had more engagement with the useful people. He thinks that would have been productive. So what we're discussing today is not a new issue. It's actually been a discussion that has been unfolding from the earliest days of the science and technology studies tradition. And of course, innovation studies was from the outset a field that sought to be performative. It was closely linked to technology management traditions, and their idea was to create knowledge that could be useful for policymakers or for managers in promoting innovation, successful innovation. So these things are becoming important. Of course, at Edinburgh, we've always had a close relationship with scientists and engineers and policymakers. That's been a feature of our work at least for 30 years while I've been here. But now we notice that the whole science and technology community is interested in these kinds of engagements. So, for example, 4S, the Society for Social Studies of Science, which is in some sense our international body, has for the last 3 years had sessions, enthusiastic sessions on making and doing, and the European Association for the Studies of Science and Technology, EAST, its conference in Lancaster has the theme Making Science, Technology and Society Together. So clearly this is an issue that's not just an issue here at Edinburgh, but right across the field. So that's going to be not the only theme we pursue, but a common theme that cuts through what we're doing.